Welcome to day 181 on the trail. We have four readings for today from 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verses 1 through 33, 1 Samuel chapter 20 verses 1 through 42, Ruth chapter 1 verses 1 through 22, and 2 Maccabees chapter 10 verses 24 through 38. Today we begin the book of Ruth, and I've asked my wonderful wife Stacy, who's also the producer of the Trail Encounters, to join me in this study. But first, let's begin with a brief introduction to the book itself. Ruth is one of the most beautifully written stories in the Hebrew Bible. Instead of dealing with national or international affairs as we have seen in Judges and 1 Samuel, Ruth is centered on a family living during the period of the Judges. This is the reason that Ruth is placed immediately after the book of Judges in the Protestant canon, in an effort to maintain its chronology. However, in the Tanakh, the Jewish version of the Hebrew Bible, it is contained within the section known as the Ketuvim, or writings. Ruth is also associated with the festival of Shavuot, the festival of weeks, which is also known as Pentecost. This festival marked the end of the barley harvest and the beginning of the wheat harvest, which is also mentioned in Ruth chapter 1, verse 22. Now, according to most scholars, the book itself was likely composed between 950 and 700 BC, that is, between the time of David and the fall of the northern kingdom to the Assyrians. In this period of Israelite history, the preservation of the Davidic dynasty would have been extremely important. As we journey through the story of Ruth, we will quickly notice that the names carry a highly symbolic character. For example, the name Ruth has been interpreted as deriving from the Hebrew word meaning friend. The sons of Naomi, who die early in the story, are named Mahlon and Chilion, which mean sickness and spent respectively. Also, Orpah, who turns away from following Naomi to return to her family in Moab, means back of the neck. Even Naomi, whose name means pleasant, will change her name to Mara, or bitter, following the death of her husband and sons. The central theme of the book of Ruth is faithfulness, or chesed in Hebrew. We will see these played out repeatedly between the main characters in the story. We will also see the powerful role that Ruth will play in maintaining chesed within her family and her placement in the genealogy of David and eventually Jesus.
As our story opens, due to a famine in Judah, a man from Bethlehem named Elimelech moves his family to a neighboring nation, Moab. We mentioned earlier the names in this story are highly symbolic. The father, Elimelech, which means my God is king, journeys to Moab with his wife named Pleasant, and his two sons named Sickness and Spent or Dying. Obviously, these are very strange names for children. However, their names foreshadow the tragedy that will befall this family as they travel to a foreign nation. While in Moab, the two sons marry Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. However, recall that earlier in our reading of the Hebrew Bible, the marriage to foreigners was prohibited in the Torah. Also, for a time, the Moabites were enemies of Israel, which adds significant complication to the story. Within 10 years of arriving in Moab, all three husbands have died, leaving Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah widowed. In the ancient world, becoming a widow was not only an emotional tragedy, but an economic catastrophe. Add to this, Naomi is living in a foreign land without financial support from her family. Naomi learns that the famine has ended in Judah, and since she has family living in Bethlehem, she decides to return. However, Ruth and Orpah are Moabites, and therefore, if they return with Naomi to Bethlehem, they will be leaving their families and any means of support and security that might be received from them. Bethlehem is not their home. Moab is. At first, Ruth and Orpah begin the journey to Bethlehem together with Naomi, but along the road, Naomi begins to encourage her daughters-in-law. Ruth 1, verses 8 and 9. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you, in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. This seems to be the best course of action for Ruth and Orpah. With their families, they can have security, and in their home country, they would be more likely to find new husbands. Amid tears, Orpah, whose name means back of the neck, turns away from Naomi and heads back to her family in Moab. Ruth, however, as her name implies, is a friend and faithful companion to Naomi. And here we find Ruth's beautiful and faithful response. Ruth 1, 16 and 17. But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." Ruth offers Naomi this life-changing commitment of faithfulness. Ruth, a widow and a Moabite, is willing to risk her future and journey to a foreign land along with her mother-in-law, who is also a widow. Also, remember that if Ruth goes with Naomi to Judah, it is highly unlikely that she will be able to remarry, since Israelites were not permitted to marry outsiders. Yet Ruth sets aside her pain, the loss of her husband, her means of financial support, her family, and perhaps her future to follow Naomi. We cannot overstate the faithfulness of Ruth in this moment. And here we find one of the most powerful definitions of friendship. A friend is far more than a thumbs up on social media or a distant acquaintance. True friends are those who are committed to the good of the other. A faithful friend is someone who is not in the relationship for what they receive, but for what they can give. Ruth, in this opening chapter, provides for us a living definition of a faithful friend, not someone that we seek, but someone that we should endeavor to become. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.